This is Father Andrew Ritchie, and you're listening to Catholic Inspiration, a podcast from my website at studyprayserve.com. These homilies, presentations, and retreats form part of my ministry as a Catholic priest for the Diocese of Superior. And now I invite you to open your hearts to some Catholic inspiration. Having just come back from a remarkable pilgrimage for the Jubilee year, I had a lot of amazing experiences, powerful. But one that really struck me this time was going to this monastery, Monte Cassino. It is the monastery where Saint Benedict, and his sister, Saint Scholastica, are buried. And to go to Monte Cassino, you go through this valley to the village of the city of now Cassino. And then once you go through the city, you look up. And you got to get up to the top of that mountain. And so our bus started the ascent. And it was a whole series of switchbacks from the valley back and forth and back and forth. And it just makes me wonder, that particular monastery has been around for a long time. And you can only imagine the monks who had to schlep stuff from the valley all the way to the top. I enjoyed the bus ride a whole lot more. But from the valley, every time you do a switchback, you got just a little bit higher. A little bit higher, a little bit higher. Now, I love heights. Until finally you got to the top. And then we got out of the bus, and I've been there before, but several of my pilgrims hadn't. And then you walk uphill, you get into the monastery, walk up some more steps, and you get into this courtyard. And from the courtyard, the church, you can go up more steps into the church, which is pretty amazing, but you can also go out and you can look out over the valley. And it's amazing that through that gentle ascent going up, your perspective changes. And having been driving through the valley to get to Cassino and be kind of, at eye level for all of that time, to suddenly be above it all. It felt like you were praying in the midst of heaven itself. It was glorious. It was beautiful. But it happened because of a change of perspective. We weren't down at ground level anymore. We descended and we're looking out from a whole different level. And because of the change of perspective, what we saw expanded as well. It's amazing what can happen physically when we can reframe how we look at something. Maybe it's because of height or distance. When we can change that perspective, we see differently and we see more. And that's the takeaway I want to share with you as we kick off this season of Advent. That as we prepare our hearts in these next few weeks for the coming of Christ, we want to change our spiritual perspective. We want to climb the Lord's mountain that we heard here in the first reading from the prophet Isaiah. God's mountain that one day all the peoples come to. This mountain where the Lord reigns, but to get there you got to make the climb. And the higher we climb, seeking God, the more our vision changes, the more we can take in. In the same way that the more we cultivate our own spiritual perspective, the more of God's love, God's grace, God's beauty, God's mercy we can take in. Because it's too easy, too often, to get caught in the humdrum of everyday life. And sometimes we need to change that perspective. Well, how do we do that in this short season of Advent? Because I'll tell you, friends, if we don't focus on this season, it's gone before we even have time to reflect. Because that's how fast Advent will go. And so what do we do to make the most of this time that this small but powerful season can offer us? If we're going to get the most out of Advent this year, there are two things I want to hold up for your consideration tonight. And they are silence and reflection. Start with silence. I don't know about you, but my life is largely one long distraction of things happening all around me. This constant buzz of activity. And you know what? And I like that. But if you're going to get a reframing of your perspective, a little bit of silence goes a long way. The silence just calms everything down. We just pause, where we take a moment to not hear any noise. We take a moment to be very still. We take a moment to turn off the TVs and move away from the screens. Turn off anything that would try to entertain us or distract us. Shut that all down. And for the time it takes to have a cup of coffee or a good cup of tea, to pause and be still. By being still, by cultivating silence and quieting down all that distraction, it changes our perspective. It allows us, in letting things settle down, to see in a different way, to hear God's voice in the quiet, in the stillness, in the silence. And so in this season of Advent, the first thing I would suggest for all of us, if we're going to be able to hear and receive the Christ child, to take a little bit of time each day for silence in this season of Advent. The kind of silence that says, Lord, I just need to be still. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Maybe I say a prayer or I think about some people, but then I quiet it down. And you know what, folks? At first, it's really hard in many cases to be silent and to just allow the silence to wrap around us. But when we do that and say, Lord, if there's anything you're speaking to me, may I be able to hear it in the silence. May I quiet my heart, quiet my anxieties, my fears, my worries, my distractions for just the time it takes to finish this cup of coffee, to savor the cup and be still. When we cultivate silence in our hearts, God will show up. When we cultivate the silence in our hearts, we open our hearts to receive grace because we're not distracted. That's silence. Reflection is the other side to that. Reflection is where we take a question and we ponder it for a moment. It goes like this: Lord, where are you leading me in this stage of my life, this Advent? Lord, what's the lesson I need to learn and apply in my life in this season of Advent? Lord, what are you laying on my heart? Lord, how can I be an offering to the people in my life? Folks, we can pick a question and just sit with it in the silence. Sit with that question through the course of a day. Because when we pause to reflect and set that question, to reflect upon that question and ask the Lord into that question, God will begin to speak to us. Because the silence creates the space and the reflection prompts us to be open to and to discern how God will lead us. And when we do those things together, folks, Advent changes our perspective. We see things differently in our hearts, in our lives, in our relationships. And I want that for all of us. I want the kind of perspective, just like climbing up that mountain, that allows us to see, maybe because we've been too busy, too distracted, too preoccupied, too worried, and we need to have a different view. When I was with the Pilgrims and then we had that God moment on top of the mountain, and we just cherished it because then we had to come back down to the floor of the valley. I looked up and I said, oh, that's where the monastery is. And I was grateful because I had the chance to see from a different point of view. Life's going to move us, and life is going to have all sorts of challenges and distractions. But when we take the time for a change of view in our hearts and in our lives, God will teach us what we need to know, and God will help us to carry it out. God bless you all. This is Father Andrew, and I hope this podcast inspires your faith. Now, if you found it helpful, please share it with a friend. And you can help me by leaving a rating and a review. I keep all my listeners in my daily prayers, and I ask for your prayers in return. God bless you, my friends.